in series 2024. Professor Annie Chu is a Chancellor's Professor in the Department of Statistics at the University of California, Irvine. She is a fellow of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, and also a fellow of the American Statistical Association, a fellow of American Association for the Advancement of Science. She is also a recipient of IMS Modeling Award and a lecture in 2024. She is a JASA Theory and Methods co-editor in 2023 and 2025. Professor Chu's research focuses on solving fundamental issues regarding structured and unstructured large-scale data and developing cutting-edge statistical methods and theory in machine learning and algorithms on personalized medicine, mining, recommended systems, medical imaging data, and network data analysis for complex heterogeneous data. So today, Annie will talk about a model-agnostic graph neural network integrating local and global information. Let's welcome Annie.
Thank you, Hao. Actually, Hao, can you remove me as a co-host? Otherwise, my side, I can hear all the people joining has a sound. Okay. So yeah, you can remove me from the co-host. Thank you. Yeah, first, I thank the organizing committee doing this Women in Data Science and Mathematics seminar. I think it's a great idea. And so today I'll be very happy to share our recent work on neuroscience problem. So this is using very new area called graph neural network. So let me see if I can move. Oops. Oh, okay. Okay, can you see the next page? I'll just try to make sure. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I have several collaborators for contributing this work. The first author is Dr. Wenzuo Zhou, and he is my current postdoc at UC Irvine, and also two neurobiologists. One is Kayland. He is a PhD student, and Nobel is associate professor at the Department of Neurobiology. And also my colleague and also collaborator and also co-mentor, Baba Shubaba at my department. So today actually we're going to talk about the brain and neural activity. I would see brain as the most complicated organ in our body, right? So like in our body, we could have a control many of our movement. I want to get up, I want to move my hand, I want to walk, right? But in the meanwhile, we almost have zero knowledge about how our brain working, right? I cannot control my brain in a sense that, especially for the neural activity. I cannot tell my brain, so your neuron has to function this way. We actually really don't know. I can sort of tell my brain I'm doing focus on this task, or I have to memorize these things, right? So in that sense, still there are many unknown research area we need to study about our brain. So this is some picture on the right side, and they talk about there are many neurons, many areas, region of the brain. But a lot of tasks or behaviors actually co-activation of our brains, right? It's definitely not going to function by one piece of neurons or one piece of a region. So we really don't know what is the mechanism behind it, this co-activation. So today's goal is try to really understand how brain works for specific behavior, especially for the memory, episodic memory. It's not just a usual memory. So what's episodic memory? So let's say if you get up the early morning like me today, in my mind, probably it's already, I'm thinking about organizing today, what I'm going to do the first, what I'm going to do the second. This is called episodic. It's sort of like you're doing the organization of your things you need to do in sequential manner. So we know the hippocampal areas is very critical to temporal organization of our experience. But still the neuronal mechanism remain unclear. Now, the question is why we care about this temporal organization. Many diseases, especially like Alzheimer's disease, it's actually very related to this episodic memory. It's not just like they don't completely remember anything, but they don't have this temporal organization. This part is really missing. So in the hippocampus area, this specific region we call CA1, it's a region located in the hippocampus area. So in this experiment, so I want to mention this data are collected by our team, by Nobel's lab. So the data is not really public available data like the usual ones. Actually, the experiment is conducted in the lab. So what they're doing is doing the experiment on the rats. They're not many rats, okay, because it's a very invasive and also it's a very intensive experiment. So they try to train the rats to perform a sequence of a memory task. So we know the rats is very good at smelling. They have very strong sense of odor, right? They're much better smell than the human. So the experiment is that they run the sequence of a different odor. So they release the odor one by one, A, B, let's say for A, B, C, D, E. And let the rats they train the rats to smell this odor in this kind of sequence. Let's see. I'm going to show this a quick experiment. So this look like this. Okay, so you roughly see that they do. Okay, so the experiment is that the rats smell this and train them. So there are two kinds of a sequence. One we call in sequence. So they train them in the ordering like A, B, C, D, E. They do many of the training. So they know that the B must come after A and C comes out of the B. So like this. And out of sequence that intentionally they insert another smell, let's say D in the third order instead of a C. So if a rat was trained to smell this right sequence, A, B, C, D, E, and if you put the out of sequence, suppose that if we train the rats sufficiently well, then the rats should tell that is out of sequence, okay? So how this experiment do that? So that the rats go holding their nose, right? So they did a smell, the odor one by one release it. And sometimes in sequence, if it's in sequence, rats will stay in the area, the nose still put the poke in this box area. And once until the end of the experiment, they say, okay, the end of the releasing odor, I can move the way. So that means the rats perform correctly. They know it's in sequence. If it release the out of sequence odor, then once they smell the out of sequence, that point, let's say the third one, it should be C, but they smell the D. The rats, if the correct behavior, they should move away. They say, it's not the right smell, I moved away. So if they perform this correctly, they also will get the reward, okay? So both of us in sequence, out of sequence, if they perform correctly, they receive the reward, which is water. And if they didn't perform correctly, let's say in sequence, they moved away in the middle of the smell, they didn't do correctly, or out of sequence, they stay in the end, they also didn't perform correctly, they will not receive the reward, right? They still release just the empty box in the air, no water. So we train this rats in this kind of many times. Eventually, rats sort of know, so this in sequence, this out of sequence. But in the meantime, we also, let's see if I have the previous. So in the meantime, they also recording this neuronal activity. Through this, they put this, planted this electric tetrodes. That's why I'm also say it's invasive. They put this in the hippocampus area for the rats, recording their neuronal activity. So that's a experiment you see, okay? So through this, we try to make a connection. We observe their behavior. We also record their neuronal activity. And we want to see if there's any connection. So if we observe the neuronal activity look like this, right? This is neuronal activity they recorded. Can they associate with their behavior, their movement? So this is like the experiment, and this is we try to use a new machine learning or deep learning, this kind of tool to understand the neuronal mechanism from their behavior, and also based on their understand the memory mechanism. Okay, so you can see that you have a principal neurons, you have interneurons. This is some spikes they recorded, but the LFP is this kind of more like oscillation, this kind of signal they recorded. And so usually they have to beam certain small milliseconds to beam the information. So you have more like some smooth continuous information. Okay, so any questions so far? So this is kind of experiment, motivation, and so the problem we have. So I would say the data is overall, it's a pretty challenging data. It's not typical usual data. And the problem we try to solve is also quite interesting and very scientifically important. So naturally, you think about all the neurons in the brain. You can think about, you can represent this kind of data using graph structure, because naturally the electrical tetrodes where they planted, this is the neurons, and also can think about this is the nodes in the graph. The edge, the features is a temporal local field potential signal that we're using this tetrode recorded this neuronal activity. There are many, many features we have recorded. Okay, this we call the node feature. And edges is you can calculate it through marginal correlation or precision matrix to see if there's a connection between neurons or between these nodes. Okay, so in traditional graphic model or network data, you will just care about this kind of a pairwise association or the edge connection. You can using matrix, using other graphic model, using network data, different parametric assumption. But here I want to say that because the neuronal activity is just a pairwise association, it's not what we really care. We actually really care about the co-activation part. And therefore, the traditional method actually is quite difficult to solve this problem. So therefore, we need to use a much more cutting edge tool. For example, deep learning representation, this kind of tool to understand all these features all together, to integrate the feature instead of just look at the local information, okay? Also, we try to see that what is association between the neuronal activity, right? Between the neuronal, between their behavior associated with this neuronal activity. So this is kind of a brief talk about the usage of a deep representation learning. So all starting with a deep learning, but getting even more and more applications. For example, in the text, like ChatGPT, we're using the transformer. It's also fundamentally, it's using the deep representation learning. You might wonder what is deep representation learning. I would say fundamentally, it's very related to our latent space. In statistics, we understand the latent variable, latent space. So deep representation learning, it's just another sophisticated way to understand the latent space, which we cannot observe, but we try to estimate, okay? So the transformer used in text, and also recent in image data, people using this denoise diffusion model. So we are wondering in graphic network data, what kind of architecture is used in deep representation learning, okay? So, and here, so today I give you a little bit introduction about the graph neural network. This was first introduced in 2009, and afterwards there are many follow-up, for example, graph convolution network, graph attention network, and graph isomorphism. I mentioned this cutting edge work because eventually we're also going to compare the existing GNN. We not just apply the GNN, we're also going to say we can do better than the current framework in GNN. Now, this, you might be familiar, some of you attend this international conference, learning representation. The GNN actually is the top 3 words. There are many top keywords, reinforcement learning, deep learning, but graph neural network actually is number 3. I think this is the previous one, but recently I noticed ICLR, the GNN still the number 3. It's quite interesting, okay? So, so what is the key idea behind the GNN? Okay, the key idea they try to use, they call the message passing. In that sense, that it's not just like a typical graphic model or network data. They believe that nodes connection just through the direct pairwise nodes connection through the edge. They believe they're all related. So the message passing is like, I pass a message to you, you pass a message to another person. It's like this. It's like a wave of the latent estimation. So you can update the node information. Let's say B and C are the adjacent to the A. We call the first order. It's an immediate relation. But D is the second order of the C. So if any change of the D information can trigger the C and eventually trigger the A. So this kind of, you have a first round of message passing, then second round of message passing. You eventually doing many information aggregation from the nearest neighborhood to furthest away. So all this data eventually all connected and keep updating, and you get this better understanding of the connection, not just through adjacent association, but also beyond in much hierarchical way and also high order way to pass the information. Okay, so it's kind of general. So this is very useful, especially in our application, because let's say we actually, for this our neural activity, we actually have a low order. We also have a high order. They have a direct implication. For example, if a neuron firing within a specific function region, they might just form the memory, the simple memory. So things I need to remember, okay? So this is consolidated in hippocampus area. But also humans are highly intelligent. It's not like a robot, right? You also have high order information aggregation. So this is related to mutualism or cooperation effects across different regions. So first, the low order, we talk about memory formation. For the high order, memory also transfer, and we also do generalization. So you might think about, for example, for the autism, right? Autism person, they might have very good low order memory. They can remember things easily. But however, their high order part is missing. They cannot do memory transfer. They cannot do generalization. So if they think this memory, this only for this situation, they cannot infer for other situations. So something missing for this high order mutualism or cooperation part, okay? So therefore, this message passing idea is very, very useful in this, in our neurobiological motivated example, because we're not just interested in the adjacent information aggregation, but we're also interested in high order one. So, but there's a limitation for this GNN, because this is also limitation for deep learning in general, because the whole deep learning is doing the hierarchical way, right? So you have a first layer, second layer. So eventually especially for this kind of GNN, you could have a memoryless. So you do many overriding embedding. You're doing this composition function, you're doing graph Laplacian, doing this nonlinear transformation, And everything that built on the previous one, you keep aggregating this. The problem is eventually you capture the high order information, but somehow you wash out the low order information. This is also related to the black box problem in deep learning, because eventually everything is hierarchical. You're using the previous information, previous user, previous information. Eventually, everything tangled together. We don't know which one explain which task, which outcome. So this is so it's a very powerful tool, but also has some limitation. You are memoryless, okay? So, so here's what we try to propose. We call the model-agnostic GNN. We actually try to accomplish two goals. One's estimation model, we try to do better prediction. So the prediction is not just care about the final output, we also try to effectively integrating low order and high order information. In addition, we also want to do something beyond than the GNN cannot accomplish, the interpretation. So we try to identify inferential structure of the trend estimation model. So we try to explain which features are important, which nodes are important, and also which time period it is a concentration level that it is important. So this is a roadmap for the first task, the estimation model. We want to have a full representation, not just the final output. We also want to evaluate the quality of each representation. And the third one is a fusion part. We try to aggregate them, okay? This is just for the first task. So here, so we talk, so this is all the terminology they use. They call actor network. That means for each training layer, in some sense, it's a single weak learner, okay? So all this, it's a single weak learner, and we call actor network. So here's each, even though it's a weak learner, they still learn a unique order information. So we talk about, you have an adjacent one, tell you some neighborhood one, and further away one, maybe tell you this mutualism information. But we actually want to have all this information, not just a final output, okay? So, so we want to contain every actor network, the weak learner, we want to keep it. The second one, so it's very important to get a critic in a sense that how important of each weak learner. So this is like we evaluate the quality, okay? Evaluate the quality. So this is especially in learning representation, we need to figure out if this learning representation is important or not that important. How can we evaluate? So idea is also very intuitive. This critic also we call the weight, or we call the quality of each learner, is really related to misclassification error. So if the misclassification error is big, then that means this overall, the critic should be weaker because you're not doing a good job. You're not helping the classification. So it is negatively associated with a misclassification error. Smaller error, epsilon, you have a large quality. Okay, so that overall makes sense. And then how we can calculate the misclassification error rate. So this is by a very machine learning kind of tool. It's like you have this indicator function. S is a label, that's the observation, and F is your decision that whether you think what is your labeling should be based on your model. Here's your deep representation model, right? So this is your, in sense, instead we call fitted information. This is observed information. If they agree with each other, you classify correctly. If you don't agree with each other, if they're not equal, then you misclassify, okay? But here it's not just simple indicator function, it is also weighted by beta, okay? So how we determine this beta? This beta actually also take this heterogeneity among graph instance into consideration, because you also need to put more weights on the graph sample, which are not sufficiently represented. So in that sense, otherwise you keep a concentrate on the sample you observe frequently, and you ignore the one less observed, okay? So in general, this beta is updated through this part is just like a margin, right? The S multiply F, it's just the margin. So this is negatively associated with a margin, and we call it exponential loss. But in that sense, we also incorporate the heterogeneity for the sampling of the graph. Okay, so in general, this critic or the quality is related to misclassification error. So the third part is the fusion part. It's also very intuitive that we have each weak learner. We're going to linearly combine them, and it's a weighted linear combination, and the weights are determined by the quality. If the high misclassification, we give a low quality, the weights will be smaller. Okay, so it's quite simple. Now, the steps we actually need to understand why, so in graph GNN, this is fusion, okay, so it's related for fusion, why fusion is a very important concept in GNN. So in GNN, they're using this called self-connection operation. So the idea is they aggregated extended neighbor by adding the identity matrix to the adjacent matrix in message parsing. And here's like A is the adjacent matrix plus identity matrix. L is a number of layers. So they do the multiplication, they multiply with each other. And the problem, you know, is similar like a recurrent neural network. If you do multiplication, you could have this kind of washout, or so eventually if any one of the factor equal to 0, you call it things disappear. So in general, the multiplication here is not really encouraging. So here, that's why we're using this fusion idea, which is using linear combination, using addition to replace this high order multiplication. So you see that you actually can expand this high order multiplication by this linear combination. It's like similar like a Taylor expansion type of idea. You can do linear combination instead of the multiplication, okay? So this is summarized for the architecture. First, you have each weak learner. You have a first order, second order, third order. We're going to contain all this information, and we're using additional feed-forward network to evaluate the quality, which is alpha. So alpha is actually also learned from the feed-forward neural network. It's learned separately. And then once we have alpha, we also do the linear combination, get this fusion, eventually get the fusion one representation. Now let's do quick show what we can gain using this representation. So here we compare this two most popular one, graph attention network, GAT, and graph convolution network, GCN. This orange-green one stands for GAT and GCN. The blue one is our method. You see when the number of layers early on, you have a smaller number of layers, 3 different methods, they behave very similarly. But then our method of taking off. This is the testing accuracy. After layer 4, we go up. We have increasing testing accuracy, but in the meantime, GAT and the GCN goes down when L increases. That's not surprising because we talk about the washing out. Once you have a large number of layers, the GAT and the GCN doesn't have much advantage. However, our method is able to integrate both low and high order information. So when L gets bigger, our performance is really getting a lot better compared to the other methods. Okay. Any question? I'm going to pause a little bit. Okay. So the second task we try to achieve is interpretation model. Okay. So previously we talked about the prediction, how we can integrate both low order and high order. So the second question is, can we provide a good interpretable model, especially in deep learning representation? This is very hard to answer the question. So when we talk about interpretation model, we need to identify important nodes, which important neuronal regions we should pay attention, and informative edges, like what connection of the important nodes we should learn. And also inferential dimension of a node feature, which features are important. So this all visualized by this graph. So certain neurons, a lot of neurons, it's just like a noise neurons. They don't do much functional activity, even brain. So most part of brain is not really, I would say it's not really fully functional, right? So they learn that only a very small portion of our brains are really actively functioning. So we also want to, so therefore the question is how can we obtain the subgraph to identify the most influential feature, nodes, and edges, okay? So the criteria we use try to identify the best subgraph is using entropy, using information entropy. So let's think about this. This eta is a Shannon entropy. So you can think about like your like related to likelihood function. So if this p theta hat is your full graph, okay, it's a full graph, and this this one is a cross entropy. So this kind of cross entropy measures the difference of information between the full model and the subgraph. So if you have the subgraph compared to the full model, what is the information loss? In general, it's like you call cross entropy. So we try to make sure that the subgraph we pick hopefully still recover similar information or very close to the information represented by the full graph, right? So even though full graph involve many features, many nodes, but still the subgraph can recover most information. It's just like when we do model selection, we hopefully like we have a small submodel can still fully understand the data well. It's the same idea. So this is equivalent. You want to get information gain. It's equivalent to minimize the cross entropy. That means compared to the full model, your information loss is very, very minimal. Okay, so this is the cross entropy should be minimized. So this is also very related to the KL divergence. So people are familiar with the KL divergence. It's just like that. Okay, except here it's just a little bit using different terminology, but overall it's just like a KL divergence. But the problem itself, it's very challenging in a way. It's not just like a typical model selection, because we are dealing with a graph. And when you're dealing with a graph, you have many neurons and you have many combination of this subgraph. You can decide which subgraphs, let's say, which connections is important. In a sense, if you have like 100 neurons or 50 neurons, it's a combinatory problems, right? So the possible subgraphs is an NP-hard problem. It's exponential number of subgraph candidates. That's a problem. Okay. So so there's no way to check one by one, right? So here the idea is that you try to do some approximation. You cannot get exact this kind of minimizing this cross entropy. So you try to do approximation. So here, so we believe if this subgraph is from a Gilbert random graph class. Okay, so in a sense, that subgraph, you can decompose some probability of the edges, and edges follows a Bernoulli distribution. And here you assume that you can assume this certain independency feature. So therefore you can figure out the joint likelihood easily. So eventually you try to minimize the objective function is expectation as the average of this cross entropy. Okay, and given the subgraph, you try to minimize this. But still, it's still difficult in a sense because so here when you do the binary subsampling, it is a discrete nature, okay? So you're dealing with a discrete nature, make this optimization a non-smooth and difficult to solve, okay? So now we do another layer that we try to make sure it's a smooth objective function. not discontinuous type of objective function. So here we introduce this Gumbo softmax. So in a sense, eventually this edges not just like a 0, 1, but it's a sigmoid function. It's like a logistic regression type. It's a continuous probability. Okay, so you have several parameters involved. This epsilon is really introduced a randomness. Okay, so the randomness in the sampling is absorbed in epsilon. And here, this psi is basically it's a mean value. Like, let's say if you do, what is the probability these edges can be connected, okay? So psi is like a mean value. Omega is a temperature parameter in a sense that if omega goes to 0, then this kind of a continuous approximation, eventually it goes to the subgraph, the one discrete one. Okay, so they tell you the connection. So you are from how smooth of your functions related to your temperature parameter omega. So this is kind of the previous what I talked about is really how you do it implementation. But now I come to talk about the theory. Okay, so several things we try to achieve: efficacy. So when we do this learning representation, we need to address a question: are we able to fully capture the different order graph representation, right? Efficacy. The second one, we try to talk about the complexity. So when we use this Rademacher complexity, this functional sense, are we fully capture the complexity of our data? Okay. The third one is like the generalization. Can we calculate what is the generalization error doing this kind of prediction, and can we decompose the generalization error with several components so we understand which part contribute to which part of error? Okay, let's first look at the efficacy. So in general, so all this is kind of a very abstract way. The L is a Laplacian operation, and X is your feature, node feature. So the nu is like your kind of a real value weights, right? So we're doing this. This is what we're talking about, the fusion part. So if we're doing the fusion part, everything is abstract learning representation. So really, the learning representation is all the latent space. It's abstract where you can estimate this way, I estimate that way, but do they have a connection? So here, the theorem is telling us that we can find one-to-one mapping, the G, such that this mapping can fully recover this different order of the graph. Okay, so if you have a K order of a graph, using this deep learning representation, we can fully reflect the graphic information. So you have a first order, second order, we can fully capture. So this theorem is really connecting this abstract learning representation to the observed information, which represented in the graph information. But in a sense, we're also able to capture the different order enabling information. So this is first efficacy, okay? So this kind of idea is using very popularly. People just, but I think it's still coming back, connecting with our machine learning and statistics. We talk about PCA in the early days, right? So you can think about PCA is just a linear representation for the latent space. And this is beyond the linear representation. We can do the nonlinear representation through the deep learning. But the fundamental idea is same, that overall we try to using, let's say when we're using the PCA, we can capture the highly correlated data using low dimension. So similar idea that you can capture all the association and the connection between this graph information using this kind of sort of a it's not really low dimension, but still with a lot of parameters, but with many layers of a learning representation, okay? The second one, we talk about empirical Rademacher complexity. So this Rademacher complexity tries to quantify the capacity of a set of function in terms of ability to fit random data. So you notice that in deep learning, everything is a very deterministic way, right? So in the old days, like statistics, everything is a non-deterministic way, that we have the probability. So therefore, we need to use a log distribution assumption to capture a model. So the thinking in deep learning is very different. It's everything is a functional base. You're doing many composition function. So the question is, are we doing many composition function, right? Are we able, this is the random data. So the function has to be really complex enough to have the ability to fully capture the random data. In statistics, we have to use a probability model to capture the random data, to explain the randomness, uncertainty. And here, so in some sense, the deep learning is a very brutal way. So I have a computational power. I can use just a very fancy function, many hierarchical composition function to capture your random data. So the question is, can we capture this complexity? Okay, this is definition of this Rademacher complexity. This epsilon is a family of the random matrix variables. Okay, so the theorem telling us, yes, we could. Okay, and in fact, we actually provide a low bound and upper bound for our Rademacher complexity. That means it's a very tight, okay, very tight. Why we say it's tight? Because the upper bound is a proportional to the low bound. So they're in the same order. So it's not like the upper bound is very different from the low bound for this Rademacher complexity. So therefore, we can fully capture this data complexity using this Rademacher complexity, and this the bound is very tight. Okay, so in that sense, that we are able to reach minimax optimal because upper bound is tied up to some constant to the low bound. So this is again saying it's a good complexity we are able to capture and also achieve this minimax optimal. The second question, we try to understand the generalization ability. So you need to calculate what is the error part. So we show the error part can be decomposed as 3 parts. And in general, this error will converge to 0. So that's good. So if you have all these things, you control this bias, the 3 parts of bias, the error converges to 0. Okay. So first is a meta estimation bias. It's kind of like a global information. It's like you can try to relate it to the non-parametric setting. Usually when we talk about, we also usually in non-parametric function, when you talk about the error, you also have about 3 parts. First is like a global, what this function curve look like. And also in non-parametric, you also look at the local complexity, right? Whether the local function is smooth enough, right? That this is a meta estimation kind of general pattern of the trend, nonlinear or any complicated pattern. And the other part is intrinsic uncertainty. It's like the noise. Okay, every model you have the noise uncertainty that counts the error. So I kind of just give you the general picture. I'm not going to the detail with all the little math symbols, but you kind of capture the idea what this error comes from. Okay, generalization error. Okay, I have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to talk about numerical study. First, talk about simulation study. So this is the setting. You have many different number of nodes and different number of importance feature. So we try to evaluate 2 tasks. One's the classification task, whether the testing accuracy, and interpretation task. We try to see what are the important nodes, edges, and features. Okay. So first, let's look at the classification task. We are comparing GCN, GAT, GRN. We also compare the deep nets, which is just more naive way without incorporate the graph information. And we also incorporate a random forest, which in machine learning we use very often, and also use logistic regression, penalized logistic regression. It's kind of everyone understand this. So people wonder, even we don't use any deep learning tool, just using penalized logistic regression, can we also do something, right? It's better not to achieve anything. So you see that this is the classification accuracy for different setting. In all this setting, we outperform GCN, GAT, and GRN, deep nets. Actually, random forest is not that bad, okay, compared to the deep nets. Only when the number of nodes getting larger, this random forest, I would say it's quite comparable to deep nets. Logistic regression is the worst. Okay, see that, of course, right? You don't use a lot of computational power. The model is very simpler, so it's overall it's a lowest performance. Yeah, so overall, like for all these different settings, we outperform other cutting edge GNN methods. So we also, let's look at interpretation. So for the interpretation part, there's no way to compare to the GNN, current GNN method, because they don't have this tool to tell us the recovery rate of important nodes. They don't have such tool. So we can only compare to the machine learning tool, let's say group lasso, and also integrated gradient method. So we cannot compare GCN or GAT, right? Because they don't have this model selection part. So we see the recovery rate. We are doing better than the other two methods. The two methods we can find in existing literature. And also let's look at inferential edge. So using two criteria, absolute metric and relative metric. Absolute metric is a ratio between the number of remaining redundant edges after the reasoning and the theoretical possible redundant edges. Low is better. Relative is between the reduction of the number of redundant edges, okay? And the high is better. You see that compare this other two methods, AM we're getting lower and RM we're getting higher. So it's all outperform the other methods. And another one is about feature interpretation. So which features are important? So here the dimension is like 20. The first setting is 20, second setting is 50, and some features in the middle feature, some features the early feature. And in all these two different settings, we are able to capture the relevant features sufficiently well. Okay, see, this is relevant features, first the graph, and the second one is the early features, the relevant features. We capture them well. So I'm going to actually focus on the application for the rats data. So just kind of refresh your memory. We do the experiment on rats hippocampus area and insert this electric tetrodes, measure their neuronal activity. The first aim, we try to see machine learning in criteria that whether we are able to capture the complex relationship of this LFT signal and this binary outcome, either in sequence or off sequence for each rat. So we mainly try to evaluate the classification accuracy. M2 is a neurobiological criteria that we really try to interpret, because when you do this kind of scientific experiment, you cannot just tell the investigator, say, I can predict well. They want to know the reason. That's why they care. They pay a lot of money, do the experiment. They try to understand which regions are important, which part is co-activated with each other, which time window the rats really pay attention, they're focused well, okay? So the first one, the classification accuracy, again, we compare the GCN, GAT, and GRN, deep nets, and the logistic regression, penalized logistic regression, and random forest. So this is the 5 rats. Actually, there are 5 rats in the experiment. They all each have a name. Super Chris is the super smart compared to the other rats. They can usually perform better. And with the other 4 rats. So each rat we have to do separately. It's not like we can accumulate information because when they do the experiment, the measurements, even like the exact location of the neurons, it's very difficult. It's a neighborhood, but you don't get exact record from each rat from the same position. Okay, so therefore the data all didn't align even together well. So we analyze these 5 rats separately. You can see still our methods, the red one, for every rat perform better than other methods. And again, penalized logistic regression is the lowest performance, the pink one, and the random forest overall is not that bad. Okay, surprisingly, random forest sometimes even doing better than deep nets. So the second part is interpretation. We want to understand which regions are really firing during this kind of performance or behavior. So even in this CA1 hippocampal region, there's actually 2 neuron region. One's called proximal, one called distal. Now they actually have a function for this different region. Proximal is mainly for spatial memory. So if you drive a car, you have to memorize, right, which direction to go. So distal is episodic memory. It's like a time organization, which thing to first, which thing to second. So even for the CA1, we have 2 different areas. Now, notice for these 5 rats, the one really active in a sense that a lot of edge connection for different neurons is in distal region. So this explains that through the neuronal activity, we actually see that during this, when they do smell the odor, really the proximal region is not that active because they're not doing spatial memory. And the distal region, they are very active because they are doing episodic memory. They try to remember. Rats work hard, try to remember who comes first, who comes second, okay? So the second one is we try to understand the co-activation. So remember this proximal is a pretty sparse, not much connection. The distal has a lot of connection. We actually identify 3 regions. This called SPSRSO. During this memory, episodic memory task, these 3 regions really co-activated together. So in this is the domain science literature, they also mention this called trisynaptic circuit. It's like 3 regions, they really activate to each other. So this also showing that our models are working pretty well because we're able to integrate high order information. So we are able to identify this co-activation for these 3 regions, okay? The last one is also quite interesting. We also try to figure out in which time window rats really pay attention, the neuronal activity, through the neuronal activity. We noticed that so this is like from 0 to 500 milliseconds, ms milliseconds. It's a very small window, okay? They do this very fast. It's not like they take a long time try to memorize it. So notice that the firing high attention window is between 185 to 320 milliseconds, the middle part. And very interestingly, in the beginning, it's a very weak attention. The reason because during the early time, they just prepare. There's no odor release yet. So therefore, it's a very weak attention. And also in 50 to 150, also during this time, it's a very weak attention for the MEC, which is this MEC neurons is associated with a spatial memory. So notice that in the first rats made a movement, right? So that time maybe spatial, they still have active, but during 50 and 150 seconds, right before the odor release, and they just stay there, keep it very still. So therefore, it's also very weak attention on this spatial memory. Okay, so it's very quite interesting that we can very precisely know at which time window they really focus. Now notice that this could be very, very useful because let's say for ADHD, right, kids, or even some adults, they have a difficulty to pay attention, to focus. So you might wonder that this kind of an experiment, maybe we can understand better in what time window they can really focus well. Okay. So this is the take-home message for today. So today we propose a new GNN and really try to motivate this very complex neuronal activity from the rats. And the most important goal we try to achieve is we try to integrate both low order or high order information through this fusion, through this kind of three parts of our architecture. In addition, we also able to develop the interpretable model so we can identify inferential nodes, edge, and node feature. So the second part also have some machine learning concept and also statistic concept. We're using the entropy, cross entropy to identify this subgraph. And so finally, I can say that even for the existing work, there are many extensions you can do. For example, today I didn't talk about how can we accommodate dynamic settings, like the node features or the edge structure could also change over time, right? This could be more complicated to add additional layer of a complexity because it's like a change point problem. Then the edges and the nodes could belong to the different subgroup, belong to different layer. So this could be additional very challenging task in the future. So this is the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention.